Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the blue chip ratio, something that is a little bit nebulous in this time day and age, but at the end of the day does prove that recruiting still wins battles. If you're above that 50% marker, you're probably in the group to win a national championship, especially if you're over 60, then you're probably in the elite group to win the national championship. But a lot of different things can happen. Kind of hope it gets broken up this year, but just don't see it happening, if I'm being totally honest. I still think recruiting from high school is the way to do it, and I think it's going to bear itself out this upcoming year. But we got a little bit of a catch up to do. We got some things to talk about in the world of college football, and the biggest thing happened only a couple of days ago, and it is Jake Retzlaff has committed to Tulane. He will join them as a walk-on, kind of left BYU in some interesting circumstances. Got himself caught up in a little bit of a legal situation that has since been resolved, and he has found his way out of BYU. Wasn't able to get into the portal, but was able to enroll in Tulane. Sounds like he's showing up today. So sounds like he will be on campus today. They start fall camp, I believe, next Tuesday, so he'll be able to be there before camp, but he's got a lot of work to do. I'll be totally honest. You got a couple of guys in that room. I believe they've taken 5 different transfer quarterbacks this offseason. One has already found his way out with TJ Finley getting in to a little legal trouble himself. That is obviously a story that has gone around there quite a while. And then you have Caden Simonza, a very talented freshman coming off MAC Freshman of the Year last year at Ball State. Very talented kid. You have Brendan Sullivan coming over from Iowa, did some really good stuff for Iowa at times last year. This is going to be your best player. I feel very confident when I say that now. I think Caden Simonza is a guy that absolutely could get this job, at least early on. I think Jake Retzlaff's your best player. I don't think Tulane would have gotten him if he wasn't going to be the best player in that room to start things out. Will he start week 1 is a little bit up in the air. They do have Northwestern to start things off. They do come to Tulane, so that makes it a little bit easier, but not necessarily an easy landing for a group of 5 team. Then you go to South Alabama before back-to-back games with Duke coming to Tulane. That's a Darian Mensah return, which will be a show. There's no doubt about that. And then you go to Ole Miss. You're not winning the Ole Miss game. I'll just put that out there right now. If you do win the Ole Miss game, I will be on here wearing a Tulane shirt immediately. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be tough. He's going to be thrown into the fire immediately. He has to learn this offense very quickly because they're flying out of the gates. One way or the other, they're going to have to be able to win these games because this is a team that can get to the CFP. There's no doubt about that. You got to win one of those tough games to do it. You got to be able to beat South Alabama and then beat maybe Northwestern. Maybe you beat Duke. Maybe you find a way to beat Ole Miss. If you can come out of those 4 games 2-2, you're in really good shape. You're absolutely in good shape in the American, which actually did change their name this past week, which was weird. I always called it the American, but at the end of the day, you put yourself in a really great spot. If you're Tulane going forward, you definitely feel great about the position you're in, and this is going to be your best quarterback. This is going to be your most talented quarterback at the very least. Will he be up to speed fast enough for him to be starting in that Northwestern game is a little bit up in the air. I would bet yes. I would bet they brought this guy in and just said, we're going to learn as much as we can. We're going to learn this on the fly, but you're the most talented guy we have. That's the reason we brought you in so late on in the process. We need you to get ready to go. So I would bet it's going to be Jake Retzlaff from the jump. It's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. If he comes out against Northwestern and throws a couple of picks early, is it Caden Simonza right then, or do they have a little bit of a leash for the guy that they brought in pretty late in the process? So that's going to be a fun thing to watch. I think Tulane is firmly in the conversation for a CFP, and this obviously helps that quite a bit. Then we got to talk about Memphis for a second. Memphis was denied from the Big 12. Sounds like they're offered a pretty penny. $250 million was the reported amount that Memphis was willing to offer to the Big 12 to let them into the conference. The Big 12 turned around and said, no thanks. I have never seen that happen, frankly. I understand where the Big 12 is coming from for 2 different reasons. One, Memphis does not bring the TV deal stuff that a lot of other teams do. They would not bring what UCF has brought. They would not bring what BYU has brought. They wouldn't even bring what Cincinnati has brought in terms of a television deal product. Not to say Memphis isn't a great team, not to say they're not a great athletic department, because they're about as good as all the teams that I just named. But the reality is, the Memphis market is not a great market. It's not the biggest market in the world. It's not necessarily a fan base that you have to have. That's why they were giving $250 million to get into the conference. So it's not overly surprising to me in that realm. And the other part of this is, I think a lot of commissioners are looking around and saying this is too big of a league. I think they understand even that this is 18 teams up in the Big Ten and 16 in the Big 12 and SEC and 17 in the ACC. I think they're just trying to figure out, get their ducks in a row with what they have now. I think they're trying to make sure that their teams can get through the House settlement, understand where that $20 million is coming from for every single team, and move forward from there. I think a lot of teams are just going to sit pat just for a little bit. Now, 2030, 2031, get ready for some fireworks. But I think for the time being, I think they're just trying to figure out their own stuff before they bring on anyone else. So I think Memphis has a path to get to one of these bigger conferences in time, but I just don't think right now is that time, especially for the Big 12 with a lot of different moving parts to make the money work going the next couple of years. Then we got Tony Petitti defending Michigan, which is words I didn't think I was going to be able to say because Tony Petitti came down on them pretty aggressively the last couple of years, but he sounds like he has sent a letter to the NCAA. I believe Court of Infractions is what it's called, just saying, let's be done with this. Let's leave Michigan alone. Let's not go aggressively against Michigan. And this is what every commissioner would do. Let's just be totally honest. Michigan's one of the biggest products in the Big Ten. If he feels there's a world where they get a bowl ban or a postseason ban this upcoming year, he's going to find a way to make that not happen. Because if Michigan's in any position to get close to the CFP and they're left out because of a postseason ban, there's going to be a problem in Big Ten country. I can promise you that. So that's going to be a battle that we go back and forth on. What I will say, the Big Ten commissioner coming out in front of this and trying to make sure that they don't get punished more aggressively makes me think there's a punishment coming that's pretty aggressive. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. Don't know what's coming down. I don't think it's going to be absolutely devastating to the Michigan program. It might be enough, and this is something that definitely is something to watch. It should come here pretty soon, and maybe we'll be able to talk about it on Friday. If not, hopefully next week, but feels like something's coming down the pipe here pretty soon, and sounds like Tony Petitti is a little bit nervous about the Michigan Wolverines. Obviously, we'll figure it out, and we'll see if the NCAA has a leg to stand on in this case. Now we got to talk about this. This was the story that took Twitter and X and all of the different social apps by storm the last couple of days and the last couple of weeks, really. Texas recruiting has taken off in a number of different ways. In the last about 2 weeks, really 10 days, they've gotten Tyler Atkinson, the number one linebacker in the country, committed to Texas, and then you got followed very closely up by J.J. Johnson, a UGA commit, number one D lineman in the country. He flipped to Texas very shortly after, about 40 minutes after, and we did not know that was happening going into the day. I can promise you that. And then Texas, this past Sunday, added the number two running back in the country in Derek Cooper. And there was a lot of conversation about the NIL funds because the way these recruitments went down are not normal by any means. You know, Georgia was recruiting Tyler Atkinson for a very long time, pretty much since he was 14 years old. Georgia had been recruiting him. Texas comes in late in the process and was able to win out. And a lot of people have questions about that, as you would imagine. Kind of the same thing happened with Derek Cooper. Never took an official visit at Texas. Did take an unofficial back in April, so it's not like he's walking in blind to what Austin is, but definitely a very interesting thing, not a normal thing. I'm sure he will use that official visit at some point this season to go to Texas again, but definitely a very interesting thing. Not usually normal, the way that it unfolds in recruiting, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of conversation about Texas's NIL, how much they're spending. They're spending a lot of money, guys. Like, let's just be totally honest. Texas has the most money to spend of anyone in the entire country. They're going to flex their muscles in this new era that is really coming to them in a number of different ways. But the other thing that I do want to push back on just a little bit when we talk about these recruitments is not necessarily that NIL played no part or NIL was not a conversation. Of course it's a conversation, but there's a couple of different things that people have been saying over the last couple of days that I just think are a little bit disingenuous. And the first one is Steve Sarkisian. When he was at SEC Media Days this past week, he was talking about NIL and how you recruit kids today and how he said, we don't talk about NIL until the very end of the visit. We don't get to that conversation. We have so much other stuff to talk about that we don't talk about that stuff until we get to the end. And people call BS in a lot of different ways. And I tend to believe he's telling the truth. I tend to believe that every team that talks about NIL usually doesn't do it till the end. And frankly, you can wait to talk about NIL and still win the NIL battle by quite a bit. Let's just be totally honest. That's the way this business works. So the reality is, Texas has no problem putting up money for these players. That was never going to be a problem. I know there were stories about they were using the money to retain the roster. That was more just covering people's asses. Let's just be totally honest. But at the end of the day, there has been a kind of conversation around recruiting really over the last couple of years, and it's something that has always been a little bit frustrating to me. I understand the sentiment of where it's coming from, but it's the reality that if a kid takes the highest NIL offer on the table, he is then a bad teammate. He is then a bad kid. He is then someone that's going to transfer out, or they're going to lose, or he's going to decommit. And it's not to say that doesn't happen. It's not to say there aren't kids out there that take the biggest NIL money just because it's the biggest NIL money, and that's the end all be all, no question about it. That's not the reality at Texas. Whether or not you like Texas is totally by the wayside for 1 second. This team has had the most players drafted over the last 2 years. They've had the most running backs drafted in terms of Derek Cooper. They've had the most running backs drafted over the last 3 years, with 5 different guys from Texas going to the NFL from the running back position. They're the only team in the country with back-to-back CFP appearances, and a lot of kids want to be the one that breaks through and wins that first national title at a program that's really yearning for one like Texas. It's not crazy to think that these kids would say, the NIL money's good and I can do all this incredible stuff, I'm going to find my way to Texas. That is not a far-fetched thing. Tyler Atkinson, I'm sure he's watching a lot of Anthony Hill tape and saying that can be me in a year or two. I'm sure Derek Cooper, I heard he talked to Bijan Robinson. Have to assume that helped quite a bit, knowing that he went to Texas. They're not similar backs necessarily, but both have that shiftiness, both have that ability. Derek Cooper is picturing himself going 8th overall in the NFL draft. So here's the reality. Texas has all the money in the world to spend. You would not imagine the amount of money that Texas is spending right now in terms of NIL. And the biggest problem I have with it, the biggest problem I think a lot of people have with it, is we just don't know what the numbers are. We don't know what everyone is spending. We know that there's a revenue share deal of $20.5 million that you're allowed to allocate however you see fit, and Texas is taking part in that. They also have a lot of money on top of that. Let's just be totally honest. They have probably about, I don't want to put an outright number out there because then it'll seem like I have the number. I don't know what the number is. I know they're spending a lot of money, and I know they have all the money to spend, and they will continue to have all the money to spend regardless of the regulations around this thing. Just going to put as plain as it can be, Texas is going to be able to swing a big stick in this time and age. There's no doubt about that. So there's a little bit of a battle back and forth. I don't love the state of college football recruiting right now. I don't love the way that NIL is a huge, huge part of the conversation. But when we talk about these kids, we have to try to restrain ourselves from looking at a dollar figure, looking at a kid and saying, because that dollar figure is high, that is not a high character kid. Tyler Atkinson, it sounds like the number is about $1.5 million. Another thing I want to say real quickly, Tyler Atkinson, great player, incredible player. If he's making $1.5 million, I think he is well worth that money. I can promise you that. But what I'm going to say, the agents that release these numbers have every single reason to tell you a higher number than is reality. They have every single reason to say a $1 million contract, really a $2 million contract, or a $1.5 million contract, actually $3 million. We saw it happen with Felix Ojo. I think we're seeing it happen with a couple other guys in this recruiting cycle, but that's a totally other point for another day. My point is, we don't know what the numbers are. We don't know how this unfolded, and frankly, we don't know what these kids are going to be. I think Tyler Atkinson is going to be an incredible player, an incredible leader, and one of the best players on Texas for the next 3 years. I think he is that good. I think he's going to be one of the best linebackers to come through Texas in a very long time. I'll just be totally honest. I think he is that type of game changer. I think Derek Cooper is going to be an elite running back. It sounds like the number might have been around $2 million. Again, questionable number, but at the end of the day, if it is, I think he's worth that money. He's an incredible, incredible player. I think he's going to be an incredible leader for that team. And I think when you look at these kids right now, a lot of people are comparing it to A&M in 2022, and they're saying everyone's going to leave that program because that's what happened at A&M. A&M didn't have what the CFP appearances. They didn't have 25 guys getting drafted over the last 2 years. They didn't have 5 running backs getting drafted over the last 3 years. They didn't have all the other stuff that Texas has to sell. So I'm not saying all of these guys are totally going to work out. I'm not saying all of these guys are going to stick around at Texas. I'm saying I'd bet they're going to stick around at Texas. I'm saying I bet that Texas is going to be able to be good enough to win enough games and to put these guys in winning positions where they're going to feel pretty good about their decision. And yes, they made a lot of money in this process. These kids should. Let's just be totally honest. At the end of the day, this is a free market approach, and it gets messy. There's no doubt about that. But Texas did come into this recruitment, or these number of recruitments, late in the process, and they were able to win them out, and NIL played a role. There's no two ways about that. If you think NIL was the only thing pulling these kids to Texas, you're out of your mind. I'll just be totally honest with you. It is not something that is happening in Texas right now. I think they're going to be very, very happy with themselves that they invested the money in Tyler Atkinson, that they invested the money in Derek Cooper, that they invested the money in J.J. Johnson. I think all those guys are going to be awesome, and I think no one is going to be upset that they went out and got him, except Georgia maybe. Georgia's going to be a little bit frustrated, and that's a rivalry that's forming before our eyes, really, and a little bit complicated for myself. But at the end of the day, going to be awesome to watch this unfold. Texas is going to make some more people mad. I can almost promise you that. I think there's going to be a couple other recruitments that Texas finds a way to get themselves involved with that not a lot of people think they're going to be involved with. But that's something we can talk about in time. A lot of people are going to be mad at Texas, and that's just the reality for the Texas Longhorns the vast majority of the time. But incredible thing happening off the field. It's always fun when recruiting is battles. Not so much fun when it has NIL involved with it, but that's always going to be a part of the conversation. I say we just enjoy the players and try to not bury them too much for taking a good amount of money. Then we got to talk about this. We just talked about NIL being a little bit out of control. It sounds like President Trump is looking towards possibly signing an executive order to get it under control. Now, all of this is very unknown right now. What that looks like, what the number would be, even that's even allowed, frankly, in a lot of different ways, because like we just talked about, it's a free market. You know, you have guys in the NBA, you have guys in the NFL that sign endorsement deals. You can't really tell them they can't. So that's going to be a complicated thing. If you fix the tie between the schools in NIL, then maybe you have a little bit better of a way going about it. It'll be a little bit sketchy. Let's just be totally honest. It's going to be very interesting to watch that unfold. I think there's a way to do this right. I also think there's a way to make this just a little bit longer of a process than it has to be, but definitely going to be interesting to watch, something that could at least bring momentary relief to a lot of the problems that people have around the college sport right now. And then I did want to talk about Corey Adams before we got out of here. The freshman defensive end over there at Ole Miss was killed in a fatal shooting in Cordova, Tennessee this past week, right outside of Memphis. Devastating news. Not much more to say here. You know, don't want to go on this long soliloquy, but just wanted to send thoughts and prayers out to the Adams family, to the Ole Miss program. Played at Edna Carr in New Orleans, an incredible high school program, a remarkably talented kid, and a kid that was taken from us too soon. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to him, quick condolences and thoughts to his family in this time, and I'm sure there will be a really, really cool ceremony, a cool moment for that family once season does roll around, but just a terrible loss. You know, a young kid that had a really, really bright future ahead of him, and it was taken away just a little bit too early. Wanted to make sure I gave that shout out before we got out of here, because he definitely deserves to be talked about as we get closer to college football season. But a lot of stuff going on, guys. There's about a million things to talk about. We have Big Ten and ACC media days going on right now. A lot of stuff to talk about coming out of that. A lot of stuff with the SEC to talk about. And we'll get into that on Friday, I promise you that. But a lot of different things going on. We'll talk about all of this different type of stuff. Hopefully we get some type of NIL relief at some point. I don't think it's coming too soon, but we'll see what happens there. We'll see if we can get a little bit better of a cap on all of this stuff. But we will be back on Friday. On Friday, we're going to go through my top 10 quarterbacks in college football. We'll do that buy-sell segment that I was talking about with teams I'm buying and teams I'm selling for the upcoming season, and we'll do everything in between. We'll talk about media days and all that fun stuff, and we'll be very close to football. We'll be less than a month away from football by the next time we speak, so look forward to it. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.